Hi. Okay, sup fuckers, I'm back with a new snazzy D-Luke outfit and a new trailer just dropped that has really piqued my interest. After Inazuma, my interest in this game has hit an all-time low, I'm going to be completely honest, but I think this trailer is exactly what I needed to get back into the lore and story and theorizing of this game. So in the honor of that and this trailer and Sumeru here soon, let's give this trailer, Teyvat chapter interlude teaser, A Winter Night's Lazzo, the same treatment we gave Travail. Let's get going. Okay, before we even start the actual video, I want to break down the title of this trailer. The trailer is called Teyvat Chapter Interlude Teaser, A Winter Night's Lazzo. First of all, an interlude chapter is the name given to the chapters that are important, but not all too important to be considered their own thing or a part of the main story. The biggest examples of this we've gotten are the quest where we rebuild the Jade Chamber with Shenhe, and the most recent excursion into the chasm with Yelan. This is teasing another one of those chapters, although this one seems to have way more juicy meat on its bones than either of the other interlude chapters that we've gotten so far. Secondly, the subtitle of the chapter, A Winter Night's Lazzo. So, one of the most important things to understand about the Harbingers is the fact that they are based off what is called the Commedia dell'arte, or comedy of the arts, or comedy of the profession. It was a form of Italian theater that was notable for its extremely archetypal characters. Pretty much, actors would dress up in a specific outfit or talk in a certain way, and to put it in the words of BDG,
that way the audience could be like, ah, that dude's wearing a tight-fitting suit with a bunch of weird patches. That must be Arlecchino, the servant clown sometimes to two masters. This brought the audience in immediately. They knew what that character was about without any exposition.
Another major aspect of the Commedia was the fact that play was mostly made out of improv and dialogue, and the situations they got themselves in were, as everything else in the Commedia, stock situations with some twists here and there depending on the troupe that was performing it. Everybody here in the Harbingers are, as we have gotten confirmed before in the hidden quest in Inazuma that I haven't bothered to do yet, named after characters in the Commedia dell'arte. They are, and excuse my pronunciation, Piero, Pulcinella, Scaramouche, La Signora, Pantalone, Tartaglia, Dottore, Capitano, Sandrone, Arlecchino, and Colombina. I'm not going to break down each of them. There are plenty of other videos that have done exactly that, and I have more important things to do. But I do want to point out who is who, and more importantly, give context as to what a Lazzo is, because that's what this entire tangent is still for, if you remember. So, in the context of the Commedia dell'arte, a Lazzo is a comedic dialogue or action that is entirely improvised. In the Commedia, Lazzi were usually used to fill time by talking about either current politic topics, literary topics, or other just random topics of conversation, and occasionally other more theatric things like acrobatics or whatever the troupe would choose. Interesting side note about this, there is a chance that the term Lazzo derives from Lacci, which is a term used for comic interlude made by Arlecchino specifically in the Commedia, which, if you paid any attention to my awful attempt at Italian, is one of the Harbingers. So when you put it all together, you can consider this entire trailer from start to the Genshin Impact card a Lazzo of sorts. The characters are talking to each other about political topics and just current happenings, and the setting here is a funeral. That's why their speech is super stiff and unnatural. They're acting on a stage. If you've ever watched a play adapted into the movie, you can tell that it's stage dialogue they're talking in, not actual real natural dialogue. The same case here. Another thing to point out before we get into the trailer, in Russian and in Russian culture, there is this thing that they tend to do with names. And if you've read any piece of Russian literature, you know exactly how this goes. Say you're reading Crime and Punishment, and you're enjoying your time reading about this dude and his mental turmoil and all that stuff. And then like 200, 300 pages into the book, it just starts talking about some completely different person, like the flick of a switch. You'd be confused, right? Well, obviously, the book didn't just start talking about a completely different character. It's just a Russian thing to call people by multiple different names and just switch between those names constantly like nothing ever happened. So I must emphasize the fact that in this trailer, La Signora is called La Signora Rosalind, part of her first name, and Loafalter, her last name. I said there would be one more thing, but truly last thing that I want to point out before we get into this trailer. The music that is being sung. So the voice that we hear singing is probably Colombina, and she's singing a tune that we've actually all heard before, believe it or not. It plays in two places. Most notably, and the easiest to pick out, is in the Signora boss fight, in the first phase of her fight. But also, a smaller section of the melody she sings is present in the third phase of the Tartaglia boss fight, as heard here. Okay, just jumping in here to clarify that with Child, it isn't a theme that appears, but instead a specific interval that it appears in both themes, the minor second. Pretty much two keys right next to each other on the piano, so... Both of these themes really like to emphasize that minor second, and actually both of them start with that minor second, which I doubt is a coincidence. So let's just listen to both these themes and listen out for that minor second. So there is something about this melody that is being communicated here. And I think this is just Yu Pengchen being the genius he has always been. He's employing a really cool use of the Light Motif. A Light Motif is a small melody in music that portrays or symbolizes a specific idea or symbol in a piece of larger work, usually a soundtrack. In this case, I think this is the Harbinger's motif, a small melody that will crop up everywhere we see Harbingers go. Okay, now that all of that is out of the way, let's actually watch the fucking video. The first scene that we see is this pyro crystal fly flying through the snow, which is very clearly supposed to symbolize Signora in some sort of way, because she burst into a thing of pyro crystal flies. Like, it's not subtle. I think we all picked up on that one. The next shot we get is a close-up of shots on the pawn of a table. We then get a wider shot of the chessboard and the torso of a man we later learn is Piero, the first of the Fatui Harbingers. Morax's Gnosis is visible on the table, and we later see Venti's Gnosis on the table as well. And here we get the first line of the trailer.
The sages think themselves to be all-knowing, but we alone are wise to the virtue in those acts of folly.
Personally, I think sages here are a reference to Sumeru scholars, especially when we take into account the second line that Piero says here. So what do these two lines mean? Well, I think that this is saying that the sages, of course, know nothing of the true secrets of the world, at least the secrets that the Harbingers are aware of. The second line states that these Harbingers are the only people that are knowledgeable in how innocent these people, these sages, truly are. We then see a white knight take a black pawn, and Piero then says,
"In this war, not even a single pawn may be spared. Because on this chessboard, checkmate is not where the game ends."
As he says the second part of that line, a fire moth lands on the pawn that the knight had just captured. Now here it's time to talk symbolism. A lot of people believe that the pyro crystal fly landing on the chess piece is confirmation that La Signora is dead. You put a crystal fly on a captured chess piece, and you are drawing a direct link between that crystal fly, which represents Signora, and the chess piece, which represents, being dead. Therefore, Signora is actually dead. What makes this even more damning is that the chess theories have predicted for a very long time that Raiden's piece is a knight, and we very clearly know what Raiden did to Signora, so this is pretty much a reenactment of that. Some others I've seen, most notably Tevat Historia himself, have put forward the idea that this means that she isn't dead, and that this is foreshadowing her return. And while these are both sound ideas in their own way, I personally lay somewhere in the middle. I do think that Signora is dead. I do think that this is actually a reenactment of Signora dying and just complete visual symbolism of that. Maybe she's not gone for good, but she did in fact die. And I think that this scene with the moth, the crystal fly, whatever, is symbolizing the fact that her death just like sacrificing a pawn in a game of chess for a larger advantage, was a calculated risk that they needed to take in order to garner the upper hand. But just as Leah says in the response to that TH tweet, the ley lines remember all. So we'll see where the Senora thread goes. Something I would also like to point out, Dory Impact on Twitter pointed out that the board state in the trailer is the exact same as the board state in the legendary Battle for Humanity Garry Kasparov versus Deep Blue. More specifically, it's this board state from towards the end of Game 1 in 1996. You could tell by these white pawns here and the rook, knight, and queen placement by black and the jungly rook back here. Two things about this. In this game, Deep Blue was white. In this shot of Piero's torso, we can tell that he has black pieces on his side, which means he captured them, which means he's playing white. What's even more interesting about this scene is that at the start of the scene, the board is in a state where Kasparov was one move away from moving into checkmate against Deep Blue. If he had got the chance to move his rook, he would have had Deep Blue in checkmate. However, the next move we see, the knight taking this black pawn, was the move that lost Kasparov the game, cornering him into playing defensive instead of taking Deep Blue into checkmate, which is wild on many accounts. So yeah, draw from that what you will. I don't play chess, so I don't have the authority to draw my own conclusions, but you can do that if you wish. The next line I find rather fascinating. Piero says that,
Because on this chessboard, checkmate is not where the game ends.
so either this means one of two things. One, Piero and the Tsaritsa intend to play this game to the very end. So in chess, checkmate denotes the fact that no matter what move a person in checkmate takes, they will lose the game by having their king captured. Usually players end the game at checkmate because there's no reason to play out that last move. You've lost no matter what you do. But this line could be meaning that the game doesn't end at checkmate. They intend to capture that king. There is no backing out or early. Or it could mean that this game doesn't end after the game of chess ends. There's something larger going on here. Maybe it's a game of like chess boxing or something. Who knows? We then cut to a scene of a chapel that looks eerily similar to the chapel in Mondstadt. And we see Columbina laying on top of a large table, which somehow people miss is actually Senora's coffin. Like, no idea how people missed that implication. Then Igor, Pulcinella, the fifth of the Harbingers, states why they have gathered. He announces that all work for half a day shall be halted in mourning of Senora's passing. The rest of the Harbingers then give him shit for making it only half a day. Interesting note is that Pantalone calls Pulcinella mayor.
Merely half a day? People say the Northland Bank's true currencies are blood and tears. But mayor, even speaking as a banker, that sounds a little unconscionable.
So that gives us an idea where Pulcinella stands in all of this. He's the mayor of Snezhnaya, or just the capital of Snezhnaya, or possibly, I don't know. He's the mayor of somewhere at the very least. Next we get a line from Arlecchino. She has a dope-ass color palette of red, black, and white. She gives Igor and Pantalone shit for staying in Snezhnaya when Rosalind died in a foreign land. This also implies that Arlecchino travels Teyvat and does not stay in one place. This is pretty much confirmed when she says, "You couldn't hope to understand," implying that she's speaking from experience.
Rosaline died in a foreign land. But you heartless businessmen and dignitaries, always with a convenient excuse to remain in the comfort of your homeland, you couldn't hope to understand.
Finally, Arlecchino says, "Why don't you keep your mouth shut? We don't want to make the children cry." I didn't realize that this was a pun directed towards Child. I had to have Hikaru explain this to me. So next is Child's line. This line here is beyond self-explanatory. We know Child. We can move on to the next two, who are Sandrone and Capitano. Sandrone doesn't say anything of note, but Capitano definitely does. So let's break that down.
Utterly risible.
Though her methods tarnished her honor, Loafalta's sacrifice is a great pity. Her loss shall not hinder our progress. But Dottore, what of Scaramouche and the Gnosis from Inazuma?
So Capitano says that though her methods tarnished her honor, Loafalter's sacrifice is a great pity. This has three things in it. One, this is another example of that weird Russian name thing. Don't let that trip you up. Loafalter is the same as Senora. Two, apparently Senora's methods of achieving her goals were dishonorable, at least to Capitano, which gives us a hint towards either what Capitano's character is like, or how the entirety of the Harbingers operate. Probably save for Scaramouche, but we can assume that most of the Harbingers operate under honor. At the very least, that's the cornerstone of Capitano's character or belief. 3, he calls Signora's death a sacrifice, a death for a greater purpose. She died to gain the upper hand, just like sacrificing a pawn in a game of chess. He says that her loss shall not hinder their progress. Then he points out Dottore and asks of the Inazuma Gnosis and the whereabouts of Scaramouche. We then proceed to get the single most interesting line for this entire thing, in my opinion.
Conventional wisdom holds that divine knowledge cannot be rationally comprehended.
Which is to say, you cannot process divine knowledge like you can regular human written knowledge. You just kind of have to get it. You don't study it, you don't read it, you just got to intuit it. And you can't do much more than that. It's kind of like how we know to talk with our hands and body. We're never taught how to use hand gestures when we talk. We just implicitly understand how to do it.
After conquering the divine gaze, he will make his next move.
Is an interesting line that I can't really make heads or tails of. Whatever the divine gaze is, it's on his hit list and probably has something to do with Sumeru. That refers to him stealing the Gnosis and putting it inside himself. Maybe he can see all of Inazuma and is dealing with that flood of information or something. I don't know. What I find most interesting about this exchange between the two is that it implies that Scaramouche is not his own person, but instead is just kind of a puppet being played by the Harbingers, most notably Dottore. Dottore seems to be the largest puppet master as of now, to an extent beyond even what we think Piero might be doing, which I find interesting.
It's time to end tonight's foolish theatrics. Right now, you have no captive audience.
Is what Piero says next. This, of course, is a reference to the super stiff and cryptic dialogue that the rest of these people have been talking in. They are talking like they are in a play on a stage, and Piero is fed up with it. Nobody's actually watching, he says, so cut the shit and let's mourn briefly before getting back to business.
Let every worthy sacrifice be carved in ice. With this nation, endure for all time.
He makes a call of action saying that if you let every worthy sacrifice be carved into ice, this nation, Snezhnaya, will endure for all time. That is quite pertinent now that time is starting to become a huge theme and motif in this game.
In the name of Her Majesty the Tsaritsa, we will seize authority from the gods.
Finally, we have a concrete motive from these people. At least in the eyes of the Harbingers, they are doing what they are doing to seize authority, not just power, but authority from the gods. They plan to make them powerless, which they have done pretty well so far with the Gnosis they've captured. They've removed the authority from Venti and over his nation. He's just kind of a guy now. And Zhongli no longer has any ruling right over Liyue. The only person left that they've actually tackled so far is A, with ruling authority. And even then, it's not really ruling authority anymore. She's just kind of their god now, and she doesn't really rule them. Okay, so it's this final minute and a half that really makes this video just what it is. So buckle the fuck up, y'all. I'm not even close to being finished. So Piero says that absolute peace is a gift from the benevolent Tsaritsa, which is either her really being benevolent because of her domain being that of love, or just cult mentality. Can't really tell which, but the next line is the cool one.
Now you rest in this coffin, encased in layer upon layer of ice. But Rosaline, I promise you, your final resting place will be the entirety of the old world.
So what is the old world? Well, there really is only one explanation we have right now, and I think it makes sense if you really bend the words of that line that Piero speaks. So the old world might be in reference to the time before any gods showed up on Teyvat. This was the age where dragons and Vishaps ruled over the world. During this time, what were called the Seven Sovereigns ruled everything. These guys were the equivalent to our Archons, except they aren't humans or humanoid in any way, they were dragons. They ruled over the seven nations, and each of these nations were primarily attuned to their element, which sounds rather familiar, but we don't have time to discuss time loops. So anyways, the time ruled by somebody without a higher entity of authority is something that the Tsaritsa and the Harbingers would really enjoy, as we can probably assume that the Harbingers know about Celestia's influence and really don't enjoy it. The assumption here I'm making is that hopefully the final resting place, the place that Signora's corpse will lay and lay forever, is in a world not ruled by archons. She shall rest forever in the second coming of what we know as the old world. At least that's my interpretation of that line. Maybe not quite right, but we'll have to see. And then we see the title card, and then we hear a voice we haven't actually quite heard entirely, but it's identified as Columbina's voice. Although at first I thought it was like a younger Colette or something.
I must say, you're looking very young today, Doctor.
To which a voice, which we can easily identify as Dottore, responds,
You know very well that I do not take that as a compliment.
So, where's the segment in the prime of his life, then?
He's busy with a little experiment in blasphemy.
This line is a little tricky to decode, and I've only really come up with one conclusion. To make sense of this line, you have to understand what a segment is in these terms, and really the only thing that would make sense here is that a segment is like code word for a clone or a copy or something of Dottore. It's a wild jump, but hear me out here. So when Dottore answers this question, he says that his segment is out doing a little bit of blaspheming. We then see Dottore standing under a massive burning tree. This tree, it's safe to assume, is probably an Irminsul tree. In one of Albedo's lines, he says that Irminsul trees, and truly ancient ones only, can grow to be miles tall. The one we see in domains are babies compared to what they truly can become. What do we see in the trailer? A tree bigger than we've ever seen before. This is bigger than Windrise, this is bigger than any of the trees that we see in the trailers for Sumeru. This thing could very easily be a mile tall, depending on how much taller it is out of the frame up here and how much deeper the valley, which it seems to sit. I suppose that this is a fully grown, or at least a very ancient Irminsul tree. We know that these things are considered insanely holy, so burning it would be the most blasphemous of blasphemy. And what did Dottore say his segment was doing? He was doing an experiment in blasphemy. We then see a close-up of Dottore watching the tree burn. A segment of Dottore has to be a clone, because a clone of Dottore is doing a bit of blaspheming by burning a holy tree. This leaves only one more question really regarding this last scene. Where is this tree? Well, I think I have a huge break for this one, and this idea is not one that I came up with. I've actually found this on Twitter. Credit to @PikaNikki for pointing this out. In the shot of the statue of the 7 we get in the Dendro reveal, or in the Sumeru reveal in the 2.8 livestream, we can see in the background a barren desert, which contrasts very heavily with the lush green of the jungle we mostly see in the trailer. In that shot, we can see these twirly thin things sprouting out from the ground and the sand in the desert, and they look huge. They're bigger than some of the rock formations they're put up against. Then if we take a look at the tree that we see Dottore burning down, we see similar swirly thin roots coming out to or coming towards the tree. I don't really quite know, but they're there. Looks kind of like a match, don't they? Now, okay, here comes the section where I speculate. And I would like to say that the further I get into the speculation, the wilder it's going to get. So just get ready. The Irminsul tree was once in a lush yet rocky part of Sumeru. Definitely not as barren and rocky as the region of the nation is now, but it still wasn't nearly as lush as the main portion of the nation that we are going to explore in 3.0 is. However, what this region lacked in jungle and whatnot was made up for a massive, absolutely ancient Irminsul tree, possibly one of the oldest in the world that we know of. This thing has probably been alive for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, if not more than that. Because of this thing was probably considered insanely sacred and possibly even worshipped as a god or something of the sort. But there is also the possibility that this Irminsul tree is where a god was buried, if you really think about it, or at least has something to do with the death of a god. So 500 years ago, when the attack of Khaenri'ah occurred, 2 gods died. The first was Ei's twin, Raiden Makoto, and the second was the then god of Dendro, the god of wood. After this god died, the current god of wisdom, Lesser Lord Kusanali, took up the mantle of the Dendronosis. So now my question is, where would you bury, or at least worship, the death of your god? Yeah, at probably the single most holy site that exists in Teyvat, an ancient Irminsul tree. This possibly made the tree even more holy as a result, and boom, you've got probably the single most stupid thing to commit arson on. So, one last thread to discuss. In this little hidden area of the chasm, there's an item you can pick up, and it's called a shriveled seed. Here in this room, there are a bunch of roots that are digging into the rocks in the soil around you, and it seems to be our way, or at least a way, to Sumeru. This shriveled seed, I believe, could possibly be the remains of the tree that Dottore burned down. Is it a stretch? Yes. But does it make an irrational amount of sense? Definitely. And that's about all I have to say about this trailer. I'm sorry I don't have like a final concluding thought that ties everything together. This is just kind of how these videos go. They just kind of end when I run out of things to say. So yeah, it's crazy though when you can release a 4-minute trailer and somebody can write 3,400 words on it. I'm so unbelievably excited for Sumeru, and I think this trailer is only a taste of what we're truly gonna get in this nation. It's gonna get dark, y'all. It's going downhill real fast. So until next time, I'll see you guys when Sumeru comes out, I guess. So later. Also, Kole, it's not Tainari, you English-speaking asshole.